alcohol.
A card game.
Naked ladies.
A wrecked Aston Martin.
And a corpse.
What do these things have in common?
If you guessed a Wednesday night in Reno, Nevada, you would be correct. But that is not the subject matter of today's video.
There's little debate that James Bond is the definitive cinematic icon of the 20th century.
With the James Bond series spanning 70 years, 40 books, and 25 films, the guns that 007 has used are vast. And we are here today to break it all down. We'll be looking at the signature Bond guns as well as some notable mentions. We'll also be looking at what we're gonna label some dark horse guns, AKA guns that have been in the conversation to be Bond's replacement pistols. Our guest is one of the 007 authorities on the planet. In fact, when Walther needs to send in their Bond expert, Commando Bond gets the call. Looking dapper.
Got to dress up for you.
This is looking smooth. This is me dressed up, and this is you dressed up. Very different levels to the game at this point.
We do what we can.
So it's a thrill to have you here.
Awesome to be here, man.
Bonding, just hanging
for a
out.
while now, yeah.
Been drinking booze and eating steaks and having a good old time.
Hard to beat.
So let's jump right into it. So first Bond gun would be the Beretta 418. That bad boy's been around for quite a while.
Didn't we film a montage? Shouldn't we do that?
That's a good idea. Let's take you to that. Guys, let's just say that you're James Bond, but maybe you got disbarred as a secret agent. Now you're just a civilian, and James Bond lives in America. He's legally carrying an HK-P7 M8. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, but he's carrying this, he gets a legally justified shooting. Even James Bond would be glad that he had some CCW insurance. So the company that we use would be called Firearms Legal Protection. They've got a few different plans. So if you travel, you can get one that covers you in all the states that you're going to. Of course, you have to be legally carrying, right? But they've got that, they've got a family plan, they've got like the solo man plan that barely leaves his home. That way if you're in a legally justified shooting at your house or something like that, hey, you're good to go. Cover all the attorney fees, attorney hotline. So some shit pops off and you got your little card, you call, you pull it out of your wallet, you call the number, an attorney picks up the phone. Not Becky in customer service. I'm sure she's great, sweet lady. But that's not who I need right now. I need to talk to Tom, the lawyer, or whoever, whatever the attorney's name is. So anyway, check that out. The code is 1911, saves you guys about a third off the different programs. On with the show. Well, that was thrilling. The montage is a good idea.
It's terribly fun, yeah.
And, really, if you're going to come to Utah, I mean...
You got to go shoot in the desert.
Shoot some Bond guns, you know what I'm saying? So welcome to the show, everyone. Good to have you guys here. We've got a ton to cover.
And we cut down the list pretty hard to do that too.
Yeah, I would just tell you guys, hey, we've got quite a list of guns that we're going to talk about. I don't think there's many videos out there like this, really.
No, not at all.
And just be aware, we're aware there's more guns that James Bond has used. I think we've really tried to look at like, hey, what are the most significant ones?
Yeah.
Especially ones that we could get our hands on.
Mm-hmm. That's half the battle. Many
favors were called in to be able to pull all this off on fairly short notice. So we're aware there's other Bond guns. If you guys like this series, we do have a couple more editions of it that we would like to do if you guys get into it. But for the folks at home, why don't you introduce yourself? Kind of like, you're the Bond guy, but like, who are you?
Yeah, hi, my name is Caleb Daniels. I do work on Instagram and on a website under the handle Commando Bond. So that's the blending of two of my favorite passions, the world of firearms and of course the world of James Bond. So that the goal is to kind of create an entry point to the world of firearms through inarguably one of the most iconic pop culture heroes of all time. the style, the aesthetics. You know, it's not just about the guns, because the guns of Bond don't exist in a vacuum. It's watches, it's clothing, it's lifestyle. And so I really enjoy finding the pieces that are used on screen or in the page and bringing them to life and actually functionally using them in my daily life to kind of field test, run them through, talk them through.
I feel like this jacket must be a thing.
Yeah, it's an homage to one of the most iconic sequences from Goldfinger when they're going through the Furka Pass and the DB5. Yeah, everything. It's my parlor trick. You can go through anything that I'm wearing or have in my pockets most days, and there's always some sort of Bond reference. Like my Gruen is the original Connery watch, or it's an homage too, because no one really knows what it is, but it's just really, really fun.
Yeah, super cool. And I'll do your shameless plug, or at least segue you up. So you do have a book on all of this coming out. Yeah,
so this has been a project I've been working on for a very long time with Headstamp Publishing. You guys might know them from, Ian McCollum's books or the Vicar's Guide series. A lot of people are very familiar with those. Same team, same great photography, except this time it's a book titled Licensed Troubleshooter, The Guns of James Bond. So in this book, we're going to cover every firearm that's important, right? So the same story with the video. The most important firearms of the world of James Bond used by Bond throughout all the books, continuation novels included, and all the films, including the unofficial films. And most importantly, one of the things I found really enjoyable about this, again, blending pop culture and reality, we went through and I had the chance to sit down with Navy SEALs, DSS agents, CIA operatives, British commandos, and talk to them about their real world use of these Bond tools. So we blended in the history, the reality.
It's cool.
It's going to be really fun.
I'm looking forward to it. I have to admit,
like
I've kind of nerded out on the Bond stuff over, heading into this video and everything. It's like I'm genuinely looking forward to the book, and
means a lot.
I think pre-sale kicks off somewhere around now.
Yeah, pre-sale should be live.
Yeah,
via Kickstarter. That's where Headstamp does all their stuff. The other shameless plug is, as you get into the Kickstarter, you'll notice there's a lot of really cool things inside of it once we start hitting certain goals, including more work for yours truly. One of my favorite ones is about halfway through, I think. We're going to have a section dedicated to the guns of GoldenEye N64. So if we hit that goal, you'll be bullying me into writing about all those guns, like the Scorpions behind me.
Yeah.
So really, really cool stuff.
Super cool.
So definitely check it out. Appreciate all the support.
Okay, hell yeah. So the three basically categories of handguns we're going to cover. One is the signature gun, sort of the guns you most commonly associate with Bond. Our middle category is going to kind of be like honorable mentions, like guns that Bond has used, really not really signature guns, but it's like, hey, they definitely do have some degree of importance.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the third, and I think maybe even the most fun category, is I sort of call it like the dark horse guns of like,
the absolute sleepers, right?
Yeah, the sleepers that have like been in that conversation or have even been the Bond replacement guns.
But might not have been seen on screen. I think that's the really important thing. Like they're part of the Bond story, but not in such a way where the mainstream fan who's maybe caught a Connery movie or the last 5 Daniel Craig movies would have any idea of.
Yeah. So with that said, we're going to take you to the OG Bond pistol. So, the 418.
418.
Tell me about this bad boy. This is the OG.
This is the original James Bond concealed carry pistol. It's the proper gun from the Ian Fleming's novel starting in 1953. Little 25 ACP. You'll notice the weirdest thing about it is Fleming prescribed that it was a skeletonized 25 Beretta. So the grip panels are actually removed, so you can see straight through.
Yeah, which is just, the most hilarious thing in the world from the perspective of keeping your gun remotely reliable.
Functional, clean. Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at the magazine as well. The magazine has a window in it as well, right? You're exposing all of that to the elements when you do that.
Yeah. So it and it's not DASA, like how are we labeling this?
No, it's a striker fired pistol.
Yeah.
So it's got a small striker and it actually has a striker ready indicator, which is pretty unique for something that old.
It's almost P7-ish in the sense of, when you do the squeeze cock on the P7.
And you do have a grip safety.
Yeah.
And a manual safety lever. And that manual safety lever also operates as your slide lock.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty streamlined little pistol.
So can you lock that open right now, or do you have to do it on an empty mag?
No, you can lock it open. You just have to do that. But that's the other funny thing is the way the gun is taken apart, the barrel actually tips down,
Oh, whoa.
up and out. So if you lock it open without a magazine in it, you're likely to lose your barrel. So it's
That is a fascinating design choice.
it's a weird thing, and it makes reloading kind of tricky because, you know, you go to load in, that barrel tilts back even that much,
Yeah,
and
and you're
suddenly
fucked.
the magazine won't seat.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Guys, I know that footage just got blurred out because of YouTube's policies related to showing firearms. You just got to take our word for it. Basically, the barrel just falls right on
Falls
top
up
of the
and out,
gun.
yeah.
It's very, very fascinating.
Very weird.
Okay, well, for shits and gigs, as we say around here, let's shoot a couple mags for
Yeah.
that thing. Here
Go
we
one-handed for you
Moment of
guys.
truth on steel. Yes. Okay.
So that's something that can happen sometimes.
A loaded round is interesting. Usually a stovepipe's a spent casing.
Right. Well, what's weird about the whole setup too is you'll notice on the top there, that's where your extractor ejector system is. It's on the top of the slide. So it's like rolling them up and out as you're shooting.
Oh, wow.
So it makes some stuff like that kind of weird.
Yeah. And it's a heel magazine release, everyone.
Yeah.
So like there's no modern cool guy, you just push a button and it's out. It's like you literally have to dig into the heel of the gun.
You roll down here, you grab it out, you have to manually strip the magazine.
Yeah, it's process.
It's not super high speed.
Yeah.
It's
No.
really an 8-round, dump the gun, do the thing. It's a proper New York reload.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna shoot a mag.
Yeah.
All right, we'll jam that up. I'll dump one. Okay, here we go. Mag goes in, and then we rotate that down.
Yep. So
And
the
does it
safety,
go back forward?
No, you leave it down because that's fire. So that's actually one cool thing about it. While the reload itself is slow, when you let the slide go, you are also taking it off a safe. So
Okay.
it's one motion, one
Got
function.
it. And then you rotate back forward for safe.
Correct.
Fascinating. Okay. This is like oddly thrilling. I'm like kind of nerding out on this gun.
And
Okay.
obviously because of the safety also being the slide lock, it doesn't lock open on an empty magazine because you have it down to fire. So it
Yeah.
has to be up to lock.
I mean, look, guys, we show a lot of cool guns and stuff here, but like if that doesn't do something for you, I don't know what to tell you. I think that's like the coolest thing in the world.
Oh yeah, well imagine like old school early Bond, right? You're talking to Bond in the 50s who's driving a 1930s Bentley. He's got a 1911 in the glove box. He's smoking 200 cigarettes a day and he's got that on. It's such an aesthetic.
It's cool, and it's like, I really want one. We've been talking all day, and I've been trying to come up with the justification for like, well, I got a PPK, I got a P99, I don't have a 418.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, don't I kind of have to have this? So
And after
anyway,
you shoot it, you just really want it.
that's it. That's the 418.
Okay, 418.
The Beretta 418, yeah, this is the original James Bond sidearm. It's introduced in 1953 in the novel Casino Royale.
Mm-hmm.
It appears for the first time in that novel. It's described vaguely as a skeleton-gripped Beretta 25. I think you and I talked about this a lot. One of the most frustrating things about Ian Fleming, he's so esoteric and so detailed in so many things. Like, you can go out today and buy the exact same shaving soap with the right scent that James Bond used in one guy's hotel room in one novel.
Yeah.
But the Beretta and another gun, the Colt, are never actually referenced by model. They're just given these like word salad, hyper descriptive, but completely non-descriptive descriptions, right?
It's like enough to be specifically vague or
Exactly.
something.
It drives you mad. And he like really enjoyed like these like 3-word phrases. So like the skeleton gripped Beretta, long barreled Colt. Like that was a kind of a motif that he ran with a lot. Burns Martin holster, Burns Martin triple draw. A lot of these things come up. So as far as research can tell, the Beretta 418, this little striker fired pistol, is the most likely candidate for the proper, most correct James Bond gun, and that's typically what most people have kind of sided on. The Colt conversation is a lot more dramatic. There's a lot more argument there, but the Beretta, most people have sided on that. Yeah, it's the 418. 418 is an 8-round. It was Beretta's first 25 ACP pistol, first with the striker fire. It originally was called the 1919, so it went through a couple generational changes. This one I am particularly proud of because on the side of it, it's stamped 1953, which, as I just mentioned,
cool.
so it was manufactured in the same year as the first Bond novel was written and published. So it means a great deal to me for that reason. It's the original Bond gun from the original Bond year.
It's really cool, man.
It's so fun to shoot too.
On the car ride back from the range today, I was like, hey, can you look on Gunbroker to see if there's any out there? Like, I really kind of want one now. Especially having a PPK and a P99, I'm like, well, I feel like a
round out the major three, right?
Loser at this point if I don't have that gun.
And it's so fun to shoot. It's really unique. It's cool. I mean, the fact that for how old that it is, like the innovations that it had with the striker primed indicator in the back, and these are all things that kind of happened over time, right? Like it didn't originally have a grip safety. Then they added a grip safety that was like this weird humpback shape.
Yeah.
And then they deleted that and made it a lot more ergonomic. And then they added the striker indicator. And they made the grip angle a little better. So like they improved the pistol over the generations, and then we kind of started adding names to it after the fact.
Yeah.
But the 418 is, to me, the definitive. It's the latest version of it. It's really cool, and technically speaking, it would have been one of the more likely ones that Fleming could have gotten his hands on. More debate over that, but I'll leave that for the book.
Yeah, and so I feel like it probably came from you, but I was reading some passages from some of the early books, and I found it kind of interesting that like there was actually some good, interesting weapons handling where like Bond would like load his magazine and do press checks and all this kind of stuff. Where it was stuff that I found kind of ahead of the time when it came to the weapons side.
No, absolutely. I've got an article on my website, like how to train like James Bond, and it actually focuses heavily on the fact that Ian Fleming was really big on dry fire. James Bond does function checks. He does dry fire.
Yeah.
But in the scene that we are introduced to the Beretta, he ejects around from the chamber, pulls the magazine out, verifies that the striker's still dropping the way it's supposed to, reloads the gun, puts it in the holster, does a print check in the mirror, straightens his tie, and walks out the door. And then it's just one of those things that continues to happen. Like in the novel On Her Majesty's Secret Service, he's got a PPK this time, but he's going into the mountains. So he requests a pair of thin leather gloves, and there's this whole sequence where he's trying on the gloves and verifying that he can still manipulate all of the PPK's
it's really good.
So it's
really good.
A lot of people give Fleming a lot of crap for not being a complete gun guy, which is, he had his limitations, and he didn't know what he didn't know, and he improved over time, as we'll see as we go through these guns, and he took advice and learned from folks. But I think from like a logical standpoint, Fleming, in my mind, was a lot like a Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy was never in the military, and he wrote like books that were very heavily referencing like submarines and other important vehicles, so much so that people assumed he had insider knowledge.
Yeah.
And he never did.
Right.
But it's because they just logically walked through something and go, well, this is the way I would do this, and this makes sense. And I think, Fleming with his, obviously, I don't want to be reprimanded by not saying that. He obviously had a military intelligence background, so he had some familiarity. He himself carried a Browning 25 automatic. So there's clear little notes of all that. So this gun, to me, it's the quintessential early Fleming firearm. At this era, James Bond is driving a 1930s Bentley. He's chain smoking like 200 cigarettes a day. He's wearing silk knit ties. It's like it's the first 6 novels. They have their own feeling to them. They have their own flair. As the character develops, so do his tools. But yeah, the original gun, man, it's just too cool.
Well, and I guess we'll share the story on the next gun, but it's like this was around for a few books, and if I recall, very briefly in the first film until it gets replaced.
Yes and no. It was not the right gun. The whole movie, Dr. No, 1962, every single gun in that movie is actually a stand-in for another gun. So the Beretta in the film is in 1934 or 1935 because we don't know the caliber. And then the PPK is a Walther PP in 380, but it's called a PPK in 765.
Got it.
And they didn't even have a firing model. So whenever the gun shoots, it turns into a Brown FN 1910 with a suppressor, and then it turns into a high power, and then a 1911, and then back to a PP.
Okay, I got to watch Dr. No again.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, I did not
we
pick
have
up
a
on any of
whole
that.
section in the book just dedicated to how every single gun is actually a stand-in for another gun.
Oh, fascinating.
In Dr. No.
Okay. Well, I guess with that said, we'll take you to the crown jewel, the hallmark James Bond gun.
So the PPK. The PPK is nothing new. Everyone knows the PPK. Ours, however, is utterly spectacular.
It's the coolest PPK. It's a 1967 Walther PPK in 32 automatic with a Spectre silencer, which the Bond villain name on a silencer connected to a PPK is just the epitome of cool.
Yes. Like, and I mean, you don't see threaded PPKs.
No, this is a
very
custom
rarely.
barrel.
Yeah, very, very rare that you actually see. You see it on screen,
Right.
you know, like in still images and things. But it's like you don't actually in real life see a PPK with a suppressor on it. Like that's just not really a thing that happens. So like this is really a pretty spectacular gun.
Well, especially when you get to these old school ones, you've got the Bakelite grips, you've got the lanyard loop. It's that silhouette and aesthetic that's super cool.
No.
And in terms of like just total Bond nerdiness, Sean Connery's PPK in the movies was a 380 PPK masquerading as a 32. This is a 380 PPK that's been converted to 32 automatic. So it's doing the Bond thing right 3 ways over.
Yeah, and Walther does have the 32 PPKs now.
Yes, they do. Yes, they
got
do.
announced like a few months ago or something.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of cool.
It's good to see it back. It's the original caliber. 380 followed quickly, but 32 is what this fixed barrel gun just begs to be shot in.
And I would also argue that that can is not only from a name perspective perfect for the gun, but from a vibe perspective,
the aesthetics of that is
perfect for that gun.
Unmatched.
Like, and it sounds, we'll shoot it. We're going to shoot into, the steel is so much louder than the gun that we'll just shoot into the dirt here. And suppressed fire doesn't really always translate on camera as well as it does in person. But you just got to trust us on this. This sounds utterly spectacular.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
All right, send it. Stupid is what that sounds like.
Nothing.
Stupid, as the kids say. Oh God, I want it.
7 rounds of 32 automatic.
I want it and I need it, and now we'll go back to the studio.
So here we are, the gun.
The gun.
Yeah.
The James Bond pistol.
So how did this come about? How did we go from this tiny little Beretta 25 ACP to the hulking 32 and 380 PPKs?
Yeah, dramatically oversized firearm comparison, right? So Ian Fleming got a letter. He got a letter from a fan by the last name of Boothroyd, and this Mr. Boothroyd was very adamant that James Bond was going about this all wrong. He basically penned a letter that said something to the effect of that he had grown quite fond of the James Bond character, and he felt that he would not be returning home with the gun he was carrying. And, you know, as the books progressed, the Fleming's plots got more dramatic, the stakes became higher, the action sequences, which the early novels read a lot more like detective fiction, become a lot more crazy. I mean, by the end of the novel, Dr. No, he's using a makeshift spear to fight a kraken or something, a giant squid, that's what it is.
Okay.
So he's like, so, you know, just, you go from a high stakes card game in Casino Royale to that in the span of 6 books.
It's a big leap.
You know, as the action cranks up, it's like, hey, he needs something that's a little bigger. And so what's funny is this guy was heavily informed by American gun writers of the time. He was part of clubs, he read the magazines, and so he recommended the Smith & Wesson Centennial Airweight. The old school one, not the one you guys might be familiar with today, that has it's called the lemon squeezer. So it actually has a squeeze grip safety on the back.
Okay.
Little 5-shot. He carried it in an upside-down Burns Martin shoulder holster. And that was what was prescribed and recommended. Fleming pushed back because he said James Bond needs suppressors.
Okay.
And so they talk back and forth. Boothroyd mentions that there's this article that was written in 1953 about basically where they ranked, the U.S. military went through and they did a shoot test for all the small autos from World War II. And he references this article, talks about it in great detail, and Fleming asks for it to be sent to him. It's called What About the Small Autos? So Fleming gets an original copy of this. And if you hold up that article, which I found a copy of, against the actual text in Dr. No Chapter 2, Choice of Weapons, where the PPK first appears, the Beretta gets retired, the technical data is impeccably transposed. Like one-to-one carbon copy of the technical data. And what's interesting is the PPK was like number 5 of like the 7 or 8 that were on there
Okay.
in terms of overall performance. Now, granted, they were shooting thousands of rounds through these things, and purportedly the one that they had was a wartime gun that had a frame crack or something. And you have somewhat dubious nature of the data. You'll have to forgive me, Eli, for saying this, but the only gun that flawlessly passed the test was the 1911. Miraculously, it beat every other manufacturer.
Wow, look at that.
Without a single failure. So
You can't fail.
you can't fail.
Can't fail if it's perfect.
So apparently but that article became the foundation, and so the PPK comes into the fold because of this kind of dialogue between author and fan. That was me. Just a moment ago we were talking about how Fleming was willing to learn. This was a huge moment. There's actually a really great book called The Man with the Golden Typewriter, and it's Ian Fleming's letters, personal letters, during his time writing James Bond, and there's a whole section titled Letters to the Armorer, because Boothroyd made such an impact that he was, of course, written into the novel as Major Boothroyd, who is later known as Q in the movies.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, so Q is also known as Boothroyd. When you
I
look
didn't
at
know that.
Dr. No the movie, he's called Armorer, and he's Major Boothroyd, and Q is Major Boothroyd when
Wow.
Desmond Llewellyn plays him and stuff, so...
The more you know, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's pretty
That's
cool.
fascinating.
It's really
I never
cool,
knew
right?
Q and Boothroyd were the...
Yeah.
Shoot, man.
And
That's just wild.
Boothroyd, credit to him, he didn't invent the title, but he made a really great career for himself after that. He wrote a decent number of books about guns. He wrote a lot of gun articles because he outlived Fleming, because Fleming died pretty early. All the cigarettes and liquor will do that to you.
Well, don't tell me that, please. Not the cigarettes, but the other part of the equation.
So, but when he signed him a copy of one of his books, he named him James Bond's Armorer, and so Boothroyd was able to make a pretty great career out of being Bond's armorer. There's articles clear into the 80s that he wrote for gun magazines about his history with James Bond.
So, question. So did the Bond PPK start out as 32 ACP and then progress to 380, or...
Yes,
because I always think 380, but I don't actually think that's correct. I think it's 32, right?
Yeah, so primarily, the gun in the books is a 7.65 millimeter 32 automatic PPK.
Okay.
It's never in the novels referenced as a 380 auto.
Okay.
The movie Skyfall, and this is probably why it's in your brain, talks about a Walther PPK-S, the smart grip gun.
The one that,
in 9 millimeter Kurtz is what he says, which is 9 mil short, which is 380 auto.
380. Yeah.
So a lot of folks have assumed, because of that line of dialogue, that the 380 PPK-S is a Bond gun. Now, the reality is the prop gun that's used in the film is a Walther PPK. It's actually a Smith & Wesson PPK that's been rebuilt as a prop with this like palm reading, scanning grip system, right? And we can verify that because photos of the actual prop show a PPK magazine, not a PPK-S mag. So there's a lot of debate whether or not the PPK-S was actually a Bond gun. And this gun picked up in popularity after 2012. Because of that, people assumed the KS was a Bond gun. The KS and PPK are very different. They're similar but different in the most layman term possible for a more modern gun audience. It's like a Glock 43X. This was made after the Gun Control Act in 1968 was passed.
Okay.
It's the full-size frame with the short barrel assembly of the PPK, not the Walther PP.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of blending thing that allowed them to continue importing the gun after that passed. So the true Bond gun is a 32 automatic. Now, to add more confusion to it, Sean Connery's prop pistol in most of the movies had an A on the end of its serial number, which confirms that the prop gun, while being called a 32 automatic, was actually a 380.
Interesting.
So,
man,
there's a lot of nuance to the question.
There's so much nuance. I'll just tell you this, though. In terms of everything that we have in the video in shot today, I can't explain how fun this gun is to shoot.
Oh my gosh, man.
It's
a lifetime dream.
I mean, this really is absurdly a good time and sounds spectacular. You guys probably saw some of the footage of that, but it's like, I feel like there's people out there that could be like, I think the PPK is cool, but it's, doesn't move the needle for me.
Right.
And
it's a high price point.
And they see the suppressed PPK and they're like, I would get that in a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah. Especially with this can.
This is amazing.
The can itself aesthetically is really cool, but from a Bond nerd perspective, Silencer Co. outdid themselves by naming it the Spectre 9 and spelling it the correct way as well, with the RE on the end, which is the infamous Bond villains, the Blofeld era that you see in all the early movies that come back in the movie Spectre 2015. So having the Spectre can on a threaded barrel Walther PPK from 1967 from a Connery Bond era is just the coolest thing in the world. And yeah, like you said, shooting this thing was an absolute joy. I mean, this was the first time I've ever shot a suppressed PPK in 32.
Wow, which is saying something.
I mean, this is something I've been hunting down my whole life. And so to do it, have all this fun and have it captured this well, means the absolute world. It's not just memory. It's something that I can look back on.
I didn't actually know it was your first time shooting a suppressed PPK.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in cinema world, I mean, of the, I believe it's 25 films.
Yep.
Might be off by one, but
you're right, 25.
The PPK's in what, all but, I mean, 3, 4, something
it's
like
in
that?
almost all the movies except The World Is Not Enough,
Yeah.
Die Another Day.
Yeah.
It's in Casino Royale. It's not the primary gun, but in the pre-titles of Casino Royale,
Right.
he shoots the gun and then the title sequence starts, but it's not the primary gun.
Yeah.
And then clear back in Octopussy, he calls it a PPK. It's a Walther P5.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a few instances where he has a Walther, but it's a P5 or a P99 and not the PPK. And so, yeah, I mean, it's for the Eon-produced films, it is the penultimate, or ultimate, it's the ultimate Bond gun. I mean, there's no debate, there's no question. Paired with a silencer, while you don't see the pairing on screen a whole lot, I think it's like 6 or 7 films technically, the fact that the silenced PPK is used in almost every illustrated poster, in all the promos, all the teasers. Some of the most iconic moments include the silenced pistol. When you look at it, it just screams James Bond. And the PPK is meant for a silencer. It begs for a silencer. It's a fixed barrel design.
It's a phenomenal.
You don't need a piston. You don't need a
suppressor
booster. It just does what it's supposed to do. No complaints.
Yeah. Very, very cool. So much fun. So I guess with that said, we'll take you to the third and final signature Bond gun. Okay, here we go. P9.
Yeah, P99. Such a cool gun.
It's incredible.
It's a really, really cool gun. It is uniquely its own thing.
Yeah.
I can't really name another gun that is quite like this. There is this hybrid of things that I can go, okay, paddle mag release, you go, that's kind of HK and ish, or at the very least, it's a shared feature.
It was something that kind of started with HK. Walther put it on this gun.
But the trigger system is uniquely its own bizarre thing.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a decocker on the slide. You've got a double single action on a striker fire, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
And this also happens to be the first gun ever manufactured that had a modular backstrap system. That's super cool. In fact, when they first started shipping them, some of these guns came with a piece of wood that you could hand cut to make your own backstrap to fit your hand.
Okay.
Super cool. And talking about the trigger system too, this is the standard trigger system, right? The action safe is what they later called this. But the gun released with 3 different trigger systems out of the gate based on law enforcement and military requirements. This was Walther's like do-it-all gun. It constantly evolved.
Yeah.
Within the first year, there was 3 or 4 changes made. And it was offered in a million different modifications to meet the needs of the business, which was really cool. This is the gun that saved Walther.
Yeah. So let's show how the trigger works.
Yeah.
For those that don't know.
I'm gonna set it first.
Okay.
So I'll set that real quick. And now you've got the striker ready, right? So you can see that right there, where the striker, you have a striker ready indicator, which is pretty cool. The first step about this, it's not only a double single action, which is kind of cool on its own, it's also got a stageable trigger.
Yeah.
So I take that pressure up and now you're there.
Yeah.
And I can live here.
Yeah.
I can do whatever I want, I can leave it there. Also on the top there, we have our decocker.
Yeah.
So when I decock, you can see we go, and I'll do that again for the camera. You start here, you press the button, and it drops.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So you've got your standard double action, right? So
long, heavy
long,
bolt.
12, 13 pounds. The single action, incredibly crisp. But where this gun really shines is the fact that this gun, designed in 1996, launched in 97, has a sub 1/10 of an inch reset.
Jeez, man, it's crazy.
From the factory because of that. So this honestly outperforms functionality, shooting, accuracy-wise, most stock pistols today. Like I'll put this out on the range with my buddies that have all their Gucci Glocks or their over-modified 320s or whatever the case may be, and I'll hand them this stock pistol. The only thing changed out is the threaded barrel.
Yeah.
And they don't believe it.
Yeah.
Because this is just how it was made.
Yeah. And this is a Gen 1?
This is a Gen 1. So Walther made a lot of modifications. The thing that makes it most obvious for a Generation 1 pistol is this very aggressive ski slope style trigger guard, and the it's a non-standard rail. It's a proprietary rail system.
Oh.
This gun came out and was designed about 1.5 years before Picatinny really took off.
Yeah.
So they made adapters for him over the years. So you can see some crazy guns that have a rail adapter with a laser light combo and all sorts of things. But as the gun progressed, it got a standard rail, had an oblong trigger guard, and in fact, the gun developed so much over time. By the time it was the mid-2000s, the P99 looked exactly like a PPQ today. And so they actually rebranded, made a PPQ, made a P99 AS, which walked the developmental steps back a few, and then carried forward.
Yeah.
So this gun just is an evolution machine.
Well, and I would argue for those of you that, like myself, that need very little excuse to pick up cool shit. So like the P99 is recently it's off the menu.
Yeah.
So really
Final
what is
edition
out
just
there?
came out.
Yeah, and I got the final edition, and it's like, because I saw that and I was like, ooh, they're not going to make that anymore. Cool, that's my cue. I need to get one before it gets all crazy out there. So it's like, hey, you can probably still find P99s at a pretty favorable price, I would imagine, but it's like...
These are the most difficult to find.
Yeah.
The Gen 3 or the AS model, or whatever you want to call it, is more common.
Yeah.
And it has more utilitarian purposes. You can throw a light on it or whatever. And the nice part about that is if you're looking to pick one up and you want to actually carry it because of all the cool trigger system things we just talked about, if you throw a weapon light on it, it'll fit any PPQ holster. Because it's obviously profiled around the light, not the gun.
Yeah.
So, I have the final edition and I run it in a sidecar holster when I feel like it.
Cool.
But this I just carry in that suede holster we had at the beginning, which was the Casino Royale screen accurate holster.
Yeah. Let's throw a couple rounds.
Yeah, totally. So I'll start from the double.
Yep.
I guess I started from the single with the double.
I know.
So
I know what you meant to do.
we'll do the proper double action here. And then you can see this trigger just staged itself right there. So as you're shooting, it resets and it just locks right there. So your follow-up shots are really efficient. Like if I wanted to run this thing fast, I can run it fast and dinner plate at the minimum.
Does this have, let me ask you this, so on mine, which is the AS, if I slightly pull back on the slide, I go to the long single action trigger. Same system or no?
So no.
Okay.
You can get it up. You can get back there. You have to go a little further.
Got it.
So the benefit of that, they actually had these really cool, back in the day, like cocking holsters.
Yeah.
So people could set it up in double action and they could rack it and it would push it and prime the striker again.
Interesting.
So you take it from double action like this and you go like that, like even just a minute bit, and it pops it back into there. So they had the holster click clack, draw, better trigger power.
Cool.
A little more efficient.
Very cool. Let's see this bad boy.
Yeah, please.
I don't think I've shot this yet today, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, you can feel the follow-ups. They're really clean. The gun wants to be shot.
It's a cool gun. Cool gun.
P99.
The P99.
Here we go. Such a cool gun. I love it.
Incredibly cool.
Obviously, we just took you guys from some range footage there. So where does this? It very notably enters the Bond universe in a not so subtle way, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. So in 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies, Pierce Brosnan, in the climax to the film, is in the Wei Lin, the Chinese agent's bunker, and he's pulling through equipment. She's teasing him about how they made some improvements on his Omega that he picks up. And he pulls out a drawer. The music it clearly changes to this new little bit of score.
Yeah.
And he picks up the P99 and shifts it in his hands very clearly.
Yeah.
And says, the new Walther. I've been asking Q to get me one of these.
Yeah.
So it's a very, and then the movie, talk about like 90s action hero awesomeness. The movie concludes with him in full black SAS style gear, running through a stealth boat
Yeah.
with a suppressed MP5K
Yeah.
and a suppressed P99
Yeah, basically
in
he's
both
got that,
hands,
yeah.
dual wielding and blasting away.
Yeah.
It's a pretty memorable sequence, and
Yeah.
and then of course it becomes the dedicated Bond gun through the end of Casino Royale.
Yeah. So I mean, really, we're looking at basically 2.5 Brosnan movies and the better part of a Daniel Craig movie.
Yeah, the majority, aside from the pre-title sequence, this is the gun that Daniel Craig uses in Casino Royale. It's super memorable. The climax, the whole 9 yards.
What gen was in Casino Royale?
It would have been a Gen 1 like this.
Okay.
Which, those are loose terms. I think it's important to say too, because there's no clear indication as to what there are. The technical guns that appear in a lot of the Brosnan movies, and sometimes you see, I think, at least one example of it in Craig, don't quote me on that, is a pre-production gun.
Oh,
So
wow.
the story of this gun getting onto set is pretty awesome. Walther was
Have at it.
purchased in 1993 by Umarex, which is an airgun manufacturer, and the owner of Umarex, one of the partners, Wolf-Heinz Flaumer, visionary, amazing marketer, great guy. I got to spend a couple days with him in Germany, and it was a trip of a lifetime. They immediately started bringing in some of the best gun designers in the world to create the gun that would, in fact, save Walther as a brand. Because in '93, Walther was pretty destitute. The company was selling first production, limited edition guns, original drawings. It was getting to the point where if the company didn't sell when it sold, there wouldn't be much except the shell and a name left.
Yeah.
So they buy it because they believe in it and they don't want it to leave. Actually, the Austrians were going to buy it. Steyr was going to buy the company.
Oh, wow.
And they made it pretty public, and Walther kind of snuck in the 11th hour, and in 3 days wrote up all the paperwork and closed the business deal while the team at Steyr was on holiday. So they swept in, they did the thing, and they bought the company. And then...
Umarex.
Yeah, Umarex did.
Yeah.
So Umarex came in, swept in, did the magic, and left Steyr in the dust because the guys at Umarex said, we can't let a historic German firm leave Germany.
Well, and I like that. I'm
like
kind
that a
of
lot,
like,
yeah.
let's preserve the brand.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm on board.
And so 3 years later of hard R&D testing, this gun comes out. It still looks pretty futuristic today.
It does.
There's a lot of things about it that are probably a little dated to some people, like the stippling pattern being like a dot pattern instead of a hypertexture that you see now in like the PDP or whatever. But the things that they did out of this gun are incredible. Like, for instance, the backstrap system, like I told you in the range, first gun in history to do that. The decocker, the striker ready indicator. It's got a loaded chamber indicator on the side of it as well. It's a very thoughtful gun with multiple trigger systems. It was the bespoke do-all gun for Walther. And so, but in 1996, when they were filming Tomorrow Never Dies, they didn't have a production gun. They had pre-production guns, as you can tell by the serial number, which starts with V as in vector. So that's the prefix to the serial number, which is used often in Germany to designate. HK does the same thing to designate a pre-production gun.
Okay.
So there's some debates inside of like some Bond circles of whether or not Bond's gun is if this is the true Gen 1, because the Gen 1 would have technically been a pre-production, but Walther themselves calls it pre-production in Gen 1, so I'm going to use their definition. And the big difference between a pre-production gun and this is the trigger guard. So while the trigger guard on this one is sloped, the pre-production gun is actually a lot more aggressive. This triangle in the front here is a lot more fleshed out. And then the hump right here is a little more aggressive. The other thing that changed, this is a later, I believe based on the serial number, we're like a 2003 production with this. The early ones actually had a split piece in the trigger here. So you could actually see where the trigger would lock into place. They later moved on to this where the trigger does still stage, but it's a single piece throughout. So these little details, and then to add insult to injury for anyone who's interested in collecting a screen-accurate Bond gun, they changed the way these engravings or etchings were done about 15 times. Some of them, the banner and the numbers are done. The font faces changed. Some of them are both laser engraved. And
so finding the true one is difficult.
Really hard, and a lot of times on screen, because again, Flaumer knew marketing. They designed a blank firing version of the P99 immediately so it could be used in screen. So Bond uses a pre-production gun oftentimes. This is the more common, it's still hard to find, but this is the most common version of the gun. And for Bond fans out there that can find a P99 that are really eager to do what we did, which was suppress it, the really cool thing about Walther is a lot of their stuff is backwards compatible. This is a Walther PDP SD barrel with the PDP recoil assembly as well.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Just dropped right into here.
Fascinating.
So I mean, I've done it before and it's really fun. You can actually put the P99 slide on a PDP frame and vice versa.
Wow.
So you can kind of create like your own like little resto mod things.
Yeah,
I'm actually
yeah.
working on one of my own just for fun, where I'm going to put the guts of a P99 inside of or guts of a PDP inside of a spare Gen 1 P99 frame I have. Because I've got a double action only version, so I can like create like a race car internals with a P99. So it's going to be really cool.
Fascinating. I mean, it's a cool gun. I've always liked it. That's why I, got one when they came out with the final edition there.
Yeah. RIP to an icon. But 25 years of killer innovation.
Yeah,
And you can still see it in the PDP and the PPQ. Like,
100%.
The gun has evolved so much, and it's still super relevant today.
Yeah. Well, so that's the big three signature guns. So up next, we're going to look at what we're going to call like some honorable mentions, right? These weren't like big signature, icons of the series, but like they do have some prominent use between the books and the movies. And up first would be the... The first notable honorable mention will be the Browning High Power. Yes, everyone, this is screen accurate.
100%.
You can imagine this was used in the film. This is actually what Daniel Craig had.
Q Branch got a soldering iron and it just went crazy.
So this particular gun, we've had it on the channel before. This was the best high power. We were like, fuck it, let's just use my high power. So Mark III Firearms did this bad boy up. It's actually a Springfield SA-35 that is cut for an acro, and there's a light rail welded on with an X300, and then this is just a 10-round magazine, because we're on YouTube, so it's a 10-round magazine.
Naturally.
And suppressed, and it's absolutely wild. But aside from this period correct high power,
100%.
how did Bond use one?
Yeah, so Bond uses a Mark III Browning High Power in 2 instances during the Daniel Craig era.
It's actually Mark III?
No. It's like, this is a Mark III produced gun.
Yeah.
But there's different eras of the gun. So he just
the irony of it.
It's just pure coincidence. Yeah. So it's actually a Mark III gun.
That's fantastic.
So Mark III. So there it is. It is screen accurate. So
there you go. Right.
So he uses it in the free running sequence of Casino Royale. He secures it from the consulate. The guy goes to pull it out of the drawer. He pistol whips one dude with it, and then he starts shooting as he's dragging the guy through.
Got it.
And so that's really cool.
Yeah.
And there's a really...
Because he's got his...
he's got his P99.
His P99 in that giant suede holster.
Correct.
Okay.
So when they tell him, he throws away the high power, and then he rips out his P99 and blows everything up.
That's right. Okay.
The whole... Mythbusters did a whole thing on that segment, like where you can't actually shoot a 9mm into propane and it blows up. Disappointing. It really broke my heart. But,
Dang it.
Aside from that, really cool sequence.
Yes.
And that's the first. And then the next time we see it is in No Time to Die.
Yeah.
So 2021 film, Bond is retired. He's living in Jamaica on his own personal little bungalow situation. He pulls out a hidden drawer to his desk. You get an overhead shot. There's a Mark III high power with, incidentally, you want to talk about screen accuracy, with a ring hammer added to it. So commander style hammer versus like the claw hammer. But it's got the Mark III grips. It has the right sights. So it's clearly a Mark III gun. And he shoves that single action pistol, no holster, into his waistband without a belt either, into like his gray jeans, throws a silk shirt over it, and goes on his merry way.
That's a bold move, Cotton.
It's a bold move. But what's cool about those 2 sequences, so it's the first and last movie from Daniel Craig. Both of them have this it looks like almost intentional. There's no way it can't be based on how coincidental it is. Overhead shot of the drawer being partially open and seeing the gun 2/3 exposed with all these personal items and belongings.
Interesting.
So you see both of those. So it's a really cool open and close. And of course, James Bond of the Daniel Craig era, former SAS types. SAS of that era, very well known, using the high power. So Bond uses this and another gun that we'll talk about later during his military service, and that's why they really fall into this honorable mention category.
Cool.
Right? Because you see him quite often for those reasons.
I like it. Very, very cool. Okay, on to the next Mrs. Bond gun. Up next, the gun for the ladies. We've got 3% female viewership, so for you, those of you watching, I like to think you're all Bond girls. This is for you.
Yeah, I actually bought this for my wife because I've got the 418, which is Bond's Beretta, Now, in 3 different movies, a Bond girl carries some version of the Jetfire, which is Beretta's. It's the replacement for the 418 in the lineage. So it was there. It's still an 8-round magazine, still in 25 auto, but it's got a tip-up barrel.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how you load it. It was designed in theory, so if you were too weak to manipulate a slide, you have to drop a round in and then close it. It's got a manual safety. And then the weirdest part of it all is it's got this button for the magazine release down there.
That's an interesting spot.
So it's an awkward kind of drop over.
That's interesting.
And I mean, frankly, the gun isn't really meant to be reloaded, right? Because unless you're doing like a combat reload, whether you already have one chambered.
Sure.
If I just put another magazine in here, that slide does not like to be manipulated by hand.
No.
So you'd have to drop another round into there. So
Yep.
you're counting your shots from 9 because you got 8 in the mag plus 1 tipped in.
Yeah.
So then you have to stop at 8, reload to keep firing.
Yeah,
It's
if you're in a
not an efficient
gunfight with
system.
that and you need to reload, at that point, run is the answer.
This gun is the definition of like a New York reload situation. You throw it like a hammer and you draw another one. You know, in all fairness to the gun, that's really what it was meant for, right? It's like a backup carry situation. It's not meant to be a duty weapon
No.
at all.
Well, let's give it a go.
Yeah.
What do we think the odds are at home that this gun makes it through this mag? I'm going to say...
Based on what we've experienced today,
I say we get...
Vegas odds aren't great.
I say we're going to get 3 rounds off. Let's scope
See
it
what
out.
we can do.
Or 1.
Or 1. So that's that whole, the slide isn't really good on manipulation, right?
Yeah.
So it's just locking in place. You can see I'm driving it home with my thumb.
Which I don't think that this is going to go well right now.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem like this next trigger pull leads to anything positive, but let's find out. Well,
It's a negative.
that's
That one slipped more efficiently.
yeah, she's it's in essence a single shot gun that just happens to also have 8-round magazine capacity.
Yeah. I mean, tip-up Berettas typically perform better than this, right? Like they've got
It's
some
an
new
old
Tomcats.
gun, you know,
This
it's
gun
like-
is, I mean, I picked it up for next to nothing, but still, it's disappointing to see this is what an older one looks like. I mean, this gun was produced in the 80s.
Yeah.
We were just shooting a gun that was manufactured in 1953.
Yeah.
No errors.
Yeah, no, running like a champ.
So,
Well, that's the Jetfire. So again, for the ladies at home watching, I wouldn't consider this you must go out and buy one. I'd say, hey, the choice is yours.
it's a cool thing to have in the
Be
collection.
aware, you're going to get 1 round of 25 ACP off, which is kind of like hitting someone with a pebble. So just be aware of that.
Well, you said Mrs. Bond.
Yes.
And to clarify, Mrs. Bond didn't do a lot of shooting, but she did get shot, so, you know.
Poor girl.
OHMSS, yeah.
Poor girl.
Poor girl. But no,
So what do we got here?
this is a Beretta Jetfire, a little
yeah.
tip-up action, 25 ACP,
Yeah.
950B is technical designation. There's a handful of variants of these that are seen throughout the films in the hands of different Bond girls.
Yeah.
3 different Bond girls. Some of them carry, it's like a 22 with a cut-down barrel at one point. Then it's a proper Jetfire, and then. Of course, the European market has different roll marks, but it's essentially this gun.
Did you say movies or books?
Movies.
Okay.
So 3 films.
Do we know what they are?
Offhand, let me see if I can do this right. Maud Adams carries one in The Man with the Golden Gun.
Okay.
Bond walks in on her while she's in the shower, and he calls it a water pistol. She like whips it out of the shower door at him. Fiona Volpe in Thunderball.
Okay.
So she draws it on him before he can draw his pistol. And then the other instance where you see one is in License to Kill.
God, he pulled it off.
License to Kill is
it off.
Timothy Dalton and Pam Bouvier are in an elevator. They're going up, and he hears that his uncle is waiting for him in his hotel room. He doesn't have a gun because the villain confiscated his at the casino. So he grabs her Beretta off of her thigh. It's nickel-plated, racks around into it very aggressively, and
Which is
kicks
not
down
even
the
really
door.
how that works.
Yeah, it's not really what it's supposed to do, but he does it.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 instances, and that's the one time Bond actually touches one.
Okay.
So
But he never shoots one.
never shoots one because, I mean, Q's in the room. So when he opens the door, it's his friend. So he doesn't blast him.
Yeah.
thankfully.
Okay. Well,
But it is a reoccurring Bond firearm, and it's also it's one of the ones that's in the conversation. There's debate as to why it's not, and why I address that very well in the book, I think, of what Bond's literary gun could have been, because this was technically in production during the novels as well, because this kind of came into play.
and
in
this
the
was in the
50s.
conversation of like this could have been Bond's gun.
Well, it's .25 auto Beretta that could be skeletonized on the grips that has
Sure.
an 8-round magazine.
Okay.
It has a safety. I mean, so based on the description, there's a chance that it could be.
Yeah.
But I make a very clear case that it's likely the 1919 318 418.
Okay, well, I'm going to read that chapter. That sounds fascinating. It sounds like you have actually thoroughly thought this through. And
Yeah, I mean, it's when you make bold claims like that, you have to like be able to back it up.
you got to be able to back it up. Yeah. Well, it's cool. As you guys saw in the footage, extremely reliable.
Disappointingly so.
Yeah. I mean, the old girl just, so it's a one-hit wonder. But anyway,
It's a Liberator pistol in
that's
25.
the Jetfire. Let's move it on. Next Bond gun. The old, or not old, actually, I'm going to take a guess, perhaps the newest production gun that maybe Bond has entered the Bond world, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely one of the newest. In fact, in 2015, when it appeared in Spectre, this was a brand new gun.
Yeah.
The all likelihood and claims on the internet, where everything is true, says Spectre would have been the first movie where this gun actually appeared on screen, and it makes a pretty big splash.
It does. It's actually a pretty good.
A lot of the
showing.
villains use it, and Bond acquires it tactically from them repeatedly. There's that great sequence with all the snow, and he's in his snow kit, all black, and you can actually see the profile of the VP9 against
Clearly.
that snow, very crisp. You can count the Picatinny rails.
Yeah.
It's really, really clear, and then he uses it at the end of the movie as well.
That's right. Yeah.
But remember, it's
Pretty
not
prominently.
It's not a P99. I'm sorry, it's not the VP9 that can shoot down a helicopter. He has to throw that away and draw his 32 PPK.
That's
and
right.
then he shoots down a helicopter with 32 automatic.
Well, it's a very powerful gun. Very powerful gun. But, I mean, the cool thing about that is, I guess you could pay for that kind of promotion, but it's like, man, a new gun hitting the market, and James Bond, like in the finale of your movie, prominently uses your gun. You're like, that's some pretty good PR right there.
Yeah, I mean, Bond films in and of themselves are made of PR. I think it was almost a third or a quarter of Skyfall's budget was paid for by Heineken alone.
No shit.
And he sips a Heineken for like 5 seconds while he's like on the beach.
Wow.
And so they did, and it's crazy. Like the product placement.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. And obviously, the Bond films, while they have a lot of firearms, aren't exactly gun friendly. And so it's one of those things where it's just like an honest, natural thing that happens. Mm-hmm. And sometimes armorers are just looking for the new cutting edge, cool stuff. Yeah. I mean, and then sometimes they hit, and sometimes they miss. Don't forget, the main henchman villain in the movie Spectre is wielding the double-barreled 45 1911 that's putting dinner plate size holes in a plane while shooting it.
Forgot about that.
Yeah.
Look, the VP9 is very cool. It can't hold a candle to the next gun. Here we go. The gun.
The gun.
This is the real gun here. Here we go.
It's funny because everyone derides Bond for carrying a little 25, but what they forget to mention every single time is in his super cool car, a supercharged Bentley from the 30s, he had hidden in a dashboard, again, a gun that is not clearly referenced, but there's a lot of argument to be made that it's the 1911. Mm-hmm. And I, again, will very clearly make that in a whole section of my book going through all the different models this gun could have been, because it's the long-barreled Colt Army Special 45, which is not a real thing. It doesn't exist.
It's pretty hard to argue against it, though.
And it's really easy to make the case that it's the 1911, especially because in one of the short stories, James Bond almost dies because he leaves the safety catch in the upward position. And he starts wrestling with a guy, it's locked up and he can't fire. So, the 1911, and to get into the history of things, Ian Fleming himself founded a commando unit during World War II.
Okay.
And he helped supply and manage them, and he was very well known. 30 Assault Unit, 30 AU, there's still 30 Commando, still a thing. They carried 1911s.
Badass.
So really cool. So of course the only one that we can kind of use to describe this is my favorite. It's my Alchemy Prime 5-inch. Classic style, the proper way to go about it. But this paired with the Beretta is the original Fleming prescription. Throughout the rest of the books and through all the continuation authors, this duo kind of affair continues throughout. Like Raymond Benson in the 90s paired James Bond with a PPK on the body and then a P99 off body in the car.
So you know, because it's fascinating, because we always go, okay, you know, PPK or whatever. But I mean, as we've talked, we've gone, okay, so essentially Bond basically had his gun when, hey, I've just got to be tight on my concealment and everything. Yep. Cool, that's my PPK. But it's like Bond also had full-size guns.
Yeah, he was prepared for like actual combat. So like, you know, like I mentioned, the Fleming novels were kind of written as like detective fiction. Like he was in elevated spaces. It'd be a real problem if he was caught carrying a firearm. So in Fleming's mind, a guy who was doing that himself with a small Browning 25, it made sense to have a gun that would be impossible to find unless you were really looking for it.
Yeah.
But when things went hot, he had a preparation. There's some really cool sequences in the novels where James Bond is driving furiously. He has his windshield folded down, driving goggles on, and he pulls his long-barreled 45. He starts blasting at the villain that he's chasing.
Very cool.
It's pretty cool. I mean, you can't really make stuff like that up because it's already been written, but man, is it just... It's the kind of stuff that just makes the novel so much cooler.
Yeah.
And the fact that America's handgun is in Britain, you know, the British secret agent's hands is just kind of perfect. I mean, Winston Churchill himself famously carried one.
Yeah. Well, hey, good on you, Winston. You know, R.I.P., but still. Okay, with that said, let's go to some dark horses.
Yeah.
Guys, James Bond, he was a British gentleman. He was not from a place called Texas, but if he was, I like to think they would call him Big Tex Bond. You know, that could be a thing. I don't know, maybe on the reboot of the series, that's what they'll do. Bond has retired to the state of Texas, and now he is Big Tex Bond. He's actually taken a side job working at Big Tex Ordnance. He works in the shipping department, and the deal is, James, Big Tex Bond, if the order comes in before 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, he actually ships it out the same day. And because now he is separated from the UK and he's a Texan American, he includes a copy of the Constitution and some candy inside of your order. He probably likes red dots on his pistols at this point, so he got them from freaking Big Tex. Might even run an X300 on the damn thing. Who knows? He's getting ARs now, kitting it out with accessories. All that's the kind of stuff that they got over at Big Tex Ordnance. You'll find the promo code down in the video description. It would be 1911 SYN, S-Y-N, not S-I-N. That will save you guys 10% off the store there. Great company, really nice folks. Ike, one of the owners over there, was on the Cheap Gun Challenge with us during the Olympics. And so you can go see who's behind the, behind the machine over there. Good folks, good company. Appreciate you guys supporting them. Last thing, if you need any other ways, need is probably a loose term, but if you're looking for any other ways to support the 1911 Syndicate, Patreon would be a great way. Interest rates are super high, so us as a small real estate shop, kind of dead in the water right now, so the Patreon subscriptions definitely help out and fund cool projects like we're doing today. So that is linked down below. Let's start talking about some more guns.
Okay, this section I think is notably fun. So essentially this is guns that have been in contention to either be a Bond replacement gun or have been.
Yeah.
And the P7 becomes pretty interesting to that.
Here we go. Of the entire list today, it's definitely at the number 1 or 2 spot in terms of grail guns.
Yeah, I mean, a nickel-plated P7 M8.
It's about as good as it gets. Yeah. That is about as good as it gets. So for those of you that are like, what is this thing? So what is that big, there's no way to, I'm just gonna say it. What is that big bulge in your
in my hand?
In your hand, yeah.
Well, thank you, first of all.
You're welcome.
It's a squeeze cocker. It's the weirdest thing in the world if you're not familiar with it, where you actually grab here and when you squeeze it, it'll close the slide, which is pretty cool. So when you go to reload, it does that, but also it's a prerequisite to functioning the gun, right? It actually cocks the striker, prepares the striker, and reduces the trigger pressure as well. Yeah. So it makes it a little easier to fire.
Yep, big time. So the P7, for those of you unfamiliar, is actually a gas piston operated pistol. I believe it's considered gas retarded delay system.
Yeah.
James Williamson, don't annihilate me if I got my words crossed there, but I know I'm close.
It's a word salad.
Yeah. Also the first gun that ever had 3-dot sights, which is pretty cool. And
And it was James Bond's gun in one book,
yeah,
which is a Greek tragedy.
yeah,
He never even shoots it in the novel, but it's part of the Bond canon all the same.
yeah. And so very ahead of its time, this gun, also with super low bore access and everything.
Yeah.
So we'll just shoot a couple rounds, just show you how it works. For those of you that have never been around these, thanks to the folks that let us borrow this gun, it's not like a super readily available.
Yeah, tracking one of these down,
Yeah,
so cool.
Yeah, good luck.
So, magazine goes in.
Yep.
Rock and roll. And you can see it's cocked as I have positive pressure on that.
Yep.
As I release it, it drops through. So I think that's a really important thing to demonstrate as
All
well,
the
right?
safeties are basically taken on and off via squeezing the gun.
Yeah, it's a passive safety system, which is pretty ahead of its time, right? Because like the most common aside, it obviously is brand new. I can say common aside from this, but primarily for law enforcement and military back in the day, your passive safety systems was a double single action,
Yeah.
which is what we just looked at, right? And so that was what they did in order to create an action safe or a functional gun that didn't have a manual safety but had an additional safety mechanism. The squeeze cocker was HK's answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty
yeah.
cool.
Of course, it's an HK, so it's completely reliable. Doesn't matter if it's from the 70s.
Oh yeah.
Guns still work. So again,
When a gun's made for folks like GSG9.
exactly. And so this came post, I think it was the 1972 Munich Olympics,
Yep.
where there was basically shooting that happened. And so a contract got put out for new police service pistol. And basically the P7 is one of the guns that got approved from that. So new mag goes in, you grip the gun. That's what gets you back in the fight. Nope.
I did the same thing because the one thing you got to note on the P7, there's not a real positive reset, and
No.
you're so used to riding the
Yeah,
lightning
yeah.
anymore on these guns and feeling that lock into place and just slapping it again.
It has one of the more unique, frankly, amazing triggers, but there's no distinction in the trigger. It's just smooth, 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 smooth. Gun goes off, and the reset's just kind of like, hey, I'm there. And you're like, are you? And it's like, yeah, I am. And you're like, fuck, okay, we're just riding this wave.
Right.
Very, very trippy thing.
But it's just so cool.
Classically cool gun.
And a Bond villain used one too.
Oh,
That's
well,
kinda cool.
We'll talk about that in the studio.
Yes, we will.
In the 1980s, John Gardner starts writing James Bond novels for the first time in like 20 years. And the question becomes, because the PPK has actually been banned from British military and Secret Service use because one jammed while Princess Anne was getting attempted, there was an attempted kidnapping of her.
Oh.
And her bodyguard had a PPK. He goes to draw it. He shoots it once. It malfunctions. He himself gets shot. The only reason she doesn't get kidnapped is because someone out of the crowd stops the guy. And so the security services overnight blanket banned the PPK.
Okay.
So that's kind of what's informing John Gardner when he starts writing his books, and that's where a couple of these dark horses crop up. Because he goes on this like 4-novel journey in his first 4 books trying to determine what James Bond's gun should be. This is the second to last choice that he makes. It only appears in one novel titled Icebreaker. The biggest crime of the book is James Bond carries it, never once shoots the damn thing. We don't have any. There's no cool sequence of him doing it. And the I think I told you this.
It's a tragedy.
The worst part about it too is like the book ends in this really cool chasing down the villain in the airport sequence. And what does he have? His Ruger 44 Magnum giant gun out of his car, and that's what he blasts him with. Not with his concealed carry 9mm. He goes all Jack Nicholson Joker, whipping out the long barrel wheel gun.
Well,
So- but James Bond does shoot one of these on screen.
this is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, Brosnan.
Yeah, Dr. Kaufman has one on him.
Yeah, the weirdo.
Pivots it around on him and blasts him with
Yeah.
it. So while he doesn't get his moment of redemption with the gun on screen.
Yes. To me, it's a fascinating gun and the conversation of what could have been the other guns that Bond could have carried. To me, a P7 makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah.
On a lot of different levels. One, at its most core, I would just say, because it's an interesting gun.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's designed to be rather discreet and compact and all that kind of stuff. I mean, like James Williamson, you know James.
Yep.
And you guys, many of you guys know James. He's a big American celebrity, right? And he still carries a P7.
Yeah.
P7 still a scary gun, you know? And that's some gangster shit right there.
Yeah, I mean, I carry a PPK, he carries a P7, and we get along for that reason because we really enjoy these like vintage firearms that have this real history with espionage, with special forces groups, and the whole 9 yards. And I think that's what makes the P7 such a good candidate for James Bond because it has the pedigree. It has the real world history attached to it.
There's also just a vibe.
Yeah, I mean,
thing.
aesthetically, in the same way like the PPK, where it's just like you see it and you're like, hell yeah. Like you see this and you're like, okay, that's just cool.
Yeah. Well, you know, and for those of you that don't know, we're going to do a P7 video hopefully later this year with James actually, but it's like, you know, the gun has a fascinating story because it was post Olympics shooting and basically there's a new request for a replacement
Demand
pistol.
for like a proper defensive like, combat pistol,
any unique contract because any gun that met the criteria went on the approved list.
So
and
the Walther was the P5 and this is the P7.
Yeah, and then basically any department or agency, whatever, they could say, hey, here's the list of guns approved for service. What do you want? This was the 7th one approved. Therefore, it went from the PSP, police service pistol, to the P7. It was the 7th pistol approved for service.
Yeah, and for a Bond reference, I mean, the fact that it's the 007th pistol.
Also kind of cool.
Kind of hard to not
kind of cool.
bite that.
But it's just like, look, it is it's an awesome gun.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's definitely in the list of like sort of grail guns for me in that world.
I'd unironically carry one if I had one. It would be part of the dedicated rotation between the 32 PPK, the 45, another gun that we're about to talk about, and this guy. I mean, I would just love to have it in the rotation.
It's very cool. It's really been fun to have this in for the video.
Oh my gosh,
Thanks for the folks for sending it in. Shockingly, this gun, the next gun is actually significantly more bizarre and interesting than this.
And it somehow replaces it for far longer.
And let's talk about it.
This funky gun.
Yes. The ASP 9mm, or the ASP, whatever you want to say. I mean, most of it's ever been in writing, so dealer's choice. This is a hyper-modified Model 39-2 Smith & Wesson. Originally designed in like the 1970s, purportedly. I'm going to just say that word once, because if I had to say it every time we talked about this gun, 2/3 of what I said would be some sort of, like, I'd sound like a thesaurus for that word. Because the mythos around this gun are massive. No one really knows. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of claims that have been made. Paris Theodore owned a company called Seven Trees Ltd, made all these really cool holsters, and supposedly built this based on a CIA contract
It's so
in the 70s.
Secret agent folklore.
Yeah.
None of it seems particularly provable.
And there's just enough grains of truth where you can't deny it.
Yeah.
But supposedly there's over 200 modifications made to this gun.
Okay.
Is what they claim. There are multiple patents for this gun, including the finger system there, the sight system, the gutter snipe sight, a couple other things. And what's really cool from a Bond perspective is all of those patent drawings show those modifications on a Walther PPK. But the final base gun he decided to use was the 39-2. These came about and were designed about the same time like the P7s and stuff were made, because back then, there was not a good answer for a concealed carry size 9mm pistol. It was either service size or compact calibers.
Okay.
And so this was an answer to that. I mean, literally a piece of the slide and barrel have been cut from the center and the muzzle has been moved back.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things done here. There was a whole shooting system designed around it.
Well, and we'll show people how that works.
Yeah, totally.
It's, I've tried it.
Yeah.
So it's
like
definitely interesting.
You lock around the trigger guard, right?
It's
and then you have
meant
to,
to be hooked.
You have to hook the trigger guard and do this. And the other thing that's really weird about the gun, I think is really important to note, is all the melted edges.
Yeah.
So the guy's claim, Paris Theodore's claim and all that, was that when you draw the gun, your first grip is non-optimal. And so the gun needs to be as slick as a bar of soap, so as you shoot, the recoil shifts it into a positive grip position.
That makes sense though, don't it?
So is the claim, and that's also why the finger pocket exists, right? So you claw here, so the gun doesn't walk away from you. You're pulling down while letting the gun slip up.
Yeah.
It's
so folklore,
It's
man.
a mythological gun, and James Bond is just, it's a cool gun for that.
It's cool with the plexiglass grip, so you can see your ammo count.
You know, you can see the ammunition through the grip, so you can watch and you can do a quick reference to see how many bullets you have left.
I got 3 left. Yeah.
If there was a gun made for Hollywood,
Oh yeah, this is pretty.
It's this,
but it's fantastically cool in almost like a horrible way, but it's really cool. All right, let's blink on it. It's an interesting shooting experience.
Yeah, the shooting of it is really special because the gutter snipe sight. So it's really meant to be like an instinct shooting. I mean, when they say it's a combat accurate gun, they really mean it.
Yeah. It's not the easiest gun in the world to be accurate with.
No, especially when you try to do it the way they tell you to, where you're locking into that finger pocket. You actually notice that it like bites you and rolls up into the hand.
Yeah, I couldn't. I'll load up a mag. I'll shoot a mag.
If you shoot it the normal way, it's almost better.
Okay, here we go. The slide release is also super stiff.
Yeah.
Like legit, I can't depress the slide stop. Let's try it in double action just for shits and giggles here.
Obviously the hammer's been burned too. I didn't mention that.
Yeah.
So when it's decocked, it's like
this
that.
bobbed hammer. So I'm gonna shoot like a normal person. Okay. Yep, that's normal. So now I'm gonna shoot with their system. I'm gonna loop
Get a look down the arm.
Now, if I remember the ads correct, it said that this reduces it to feeling like a 22. Basically, there's no recoil.
And the power of a 44 Magnum.
Yes, that's right. The advertisements will show you guys. They're fantastic. Yeah. Doesn't do a damn thing. You know, it's a fascinating gun in the list of things like for collectors and folks like that. And I guess
it's a Cold War icon.
And I would just say, I don't know if he wants to be named or not, but to the dude that let us borrow this, you know, big shout out.
No, big shout out to Ian. Ian McCollum, Forgotten Weapons. He's obviously part of the publishing team that's helping me put my book together.
Yeah.
He had one of these on hand because they're pretty difficult to come by.
Yeah.
So it was cool to have this.
Oh, it's super cool. And it's, hey, good to see GunTuber on GunTuber friendliness amongst the, well, we're a little peon channel. He's a giant channel, but it's just like, it's cool that he would let us borrow his gun like that.
It's super rad.
So anyway, all right, back to the studio.
Okay, so the ASP. How does this, I've never seen a Bond movie where I can remember this gun, so where does this thing come into play?
Yeah, so it follows that Gardner storytelling we were talking about, right? This is the fourth and final gun that John Gardner chooses as a dedicated sidearm for James Bond. Goes on this whole journey, and he discovers ASP or ASP 9mm, which, as we talked about on the range, is a gun that's full of mythology. I think it's a great case study in gun folklore and marketing jargon, and the advertisements for this gun said the most incredible thing. So James Bond not only carries the ASP, he carries it with a very specific bullet. He carries it with Glazer safety slugs.
Okay.
Which, if you're not familiar with those, they're like a core bond now kind of affair where it's got a blue tip on it. And the whole idea was it was meant for like air marshals and sky marshals or whatever, and it had a shot shell on the inside. So the idea was that it had a lot of velocity, but it wouldn't overpenetrate. Well, we weren't doing ballistic gel testing at the time.
Yeah.
And so the claim that they made, because of the velocity of the round, because it was so light, because it's a 9mm filled with shot shell, was that you had the power of a 44 Magnum in a 9mm package. That not only had that, it somehow had less recoil or equal to a 22 LR.
22. If you hook your finger and you do the system.
Shoot it the right way, but it wasn't just like things that were said. That was in print advertising.
Yeah.
It was what they, and because it was in the print ads, that translated into the Bond books. When John Gardner writes this in, there's like these ridiculous
he's like
paragraphs.
Referencing these
where it's like James Bond shoots a guy in the head with this and nothing's left but pink mist. Like shoots him in the arm and it's like in the whole arm disappeared.
Yeah, it's like a 50 cal round.
Yeah. But again, that wouldn't overpenetrate. I mean, it was a mythical round that didn't really exist in the way that it said it did.
Yeah.
In a mythical gun.
Yeah.
And so, but and to me, it really fits Cold War Bond so well because it's like you said, it's an interesting design. It's overly worked over. It's convoluted. It has a lot of weird stuff going on. And it kind of fits that, like, we're not in the internet age yet, and we're not in the 60s anymore.
It's like we can't prove anything.
We don't know what's going on, and so we're just going to keep faking it till we make it and design something.
So I
like
wrote
this.
down the line from the advertisement
good.
because I thought it was the best thing ever. So about the little finger hook thing that we showed you guys. So the 4-finger pockets. So the quote from the ad was, apparent recoil will decrease by at least 50%, becoming little more than a gentle, undulant motion. Like, what? Who's doing the copywriting of this? Like, first of all, I mean, it's amazing. It's nowhere close to accurate. But I mean, it's just comically fascinating.
It is a lot of marketing, like fabrication, and it's cool. I love, honestly.
Well, they're so rare, you know.
Yeah, they're only becoming rarer, obviously. Like the early editions, ones that were made in New York, are really hard to come by.
Yeah.
Examples like this, post Theodore and like Wisconsin and whatnot, a lot more common, but they're still pretty pricey guns.
Yeah.
Now, relative, if you're like a 1911 collector, this kind of fits into that. Used, very nice 1911, like those kind of guys aren't going to bat an eye on it, but like the average guy who sees this as what it is, which is a Smith & Wesson 39-2 that has been worked over by a gunsmith, will balk at the price.
Yeah. What are we trying? They go for what, $3-4 grand?
5.
Okay.
5.5.
Okay. Yeah.
You can see them for somewhere in the 3s sometimes, but it's close to that 5 range.
Yeah.
But you know, and you get other cool things. Like this example has the tritium dots on the night sights with the gutter snipe sight system, the patented sighting system with the 3 yellow orange triangles going down. The base.
So it's meant to be like a funnel in essence. It just
meant to
draws your
funnel your
eyes down.
That's why they want you to look down your arm so you're funneling through. The best way I can describe it, because I don't know how well it really translates onto camera when you see it, is think the original Star Wars. You've got Luke Skywalker's sighting system as he's going into the Death Star, and it's like all those lines going straight down. That's really what this is.
Yeah.
And that's all it does. And it's not it. All the marketing copy talks about combat accuracy exclusively, right? It doesn't say it's an accurate gun. It says it's meant for hard-nosed defensive shooters. Blah 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 blah.
Purely a combat tool kind of thing. Look, it's fascinating. I appreciate it for what it is, which is this folklore thing. And it's like, hey, man, not every gun needs to be the newest, coolest race gun in the world. It's like sometimes it's just cool because it's just bizarre.
Yeah.
And
well, and it was important in the development of small 9mm because there wasn't. This is like the awkward middle sun for a lot of that stuff. And Smith & Wesson actually saw so much success in this. They released their own commercial versions of this gun in like the 90s. It put ASP out of business because their guns were quintuple the price.
Interesting.
But you can find, I'm blanking on the model number, it's one of the 4 digits, but they made a modified 39 series pistol that was compact, that had a finger pocket to some degree on it, had normal sights.
Yeah.
And those became really popular because people got the ASP style pistol without paying ASP price.
Right. Yeah. I'd be curious to see what those are. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do some homework on that.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, that's the ASP. Moving on to the grand finale. An unexpected gun in some regards.
Yeah.
I don't think this was probably on a lot of people's radar that the final gun you would see here today is a Sig. Sorry, we got a dog moving around down here, everyone. If you're like, what's Jake doing with his arm down here? Nothing weird. There's a dog down here, everyone.
We like
chillax. Okay. But the Sig P226, kind of prominent in modern Craig era Bond.
Very prominent. So going back to what we talked about on the high power with the SAS military background, the 226, obviously, it has so much of that British military lineage associated with it. I'll just hold this guy.
Yeah, let's just do that.
Let's just do that. A lot of heritage here. Really cool gun. And yeah, out of 3 of 5 of his movies as James Bond, Daniel Craig carries and uses in some capacity the 226. In fact, in most of No Time to Die, this is his gun. Before he rejoins MI6, there's the whole Cuba fight and everything else. He shoots this in his tuxedo. He doesn't carry a PPK until he rejoins the service.
Yeah.
And so, and even then, during the finale,
Pretty prominent.
he has it in a drop leg holster and he
Yeah.
carries the PPK on the appendix position.
Yeah.
But this is his dedicated sidearm in that drop leg holster.
And it's also interesting because to the earlier point of the fact that Bond typically actually has a full size carry gun, if you're full size sidearm, and then his sort of smaller EDC gun. You go in No Time to Die, a movie I don't love, but at the end of it, he knows he's going into combat, right? It's like, I know that I'm going into a situation where I'm getting some gunfights, and that's actually what his primary was. I mean, as a sidearm. So it's like it is kind of interesting to go. Okay, he's not just relying on a PPK there, but it also shows up in Spectre.
Yeah, and I think Spectre, if you want to read into it, really shows that the 226 isn't just a gun that coincidentally shows up, but is Daniel Craig's his Bond's like preferred full-size sidearm, because he's traveling, he's on his own, he's not really working on behest of the government at that time. It's one of the, almost every movie he quits MI6 actually in the Daniel Craig era, right?
He's a quitter.
He quits a lot and he
Comes
rejoins
back,
all the time. He's a boomerang like that. But he gives Madeline Swan a 226 out of his personal luggage.
And calls it by name.
And he calls it by name, points it at her face, but he calls it by name.
Yeah, well, we're
no one's
doing
perfect.
good until that. But
But it's really cool because it means that was a personal gun that he was traveling with. In the same way, No Time to Die, it's when he's out of service but is working with the tuxedo, well, that's what he grabs. And in the same way, in Quantum of Solace, when he's going into known combat at the climax of the movie, when he's going in the hotel to go after all the bad guys, right? He's, again, unofficially working for MI6 at that point. He's quit again. And what does he have? Personally with him, a P226. So there's this, like, story of, like, a subplot that's never spoken but is clearly shown that this is a gun that Daniel Craig's Bond relies on. And the presumption is it's because of the military background of the 226, especially with, the British military and everything else, the special forces groups. It fits his background so well. And it really becomes, I think it fits the dark horse conversation really well because it's never a spoken thing. It's just something that appears.
Well, and I think it's also interesting because that would be a good, believable, replacement gun. If we're going to look at it from that lens, you go, that's totally viable. A 229 might actually be a little more viable just from a concealment perspective, but you go, that's a very passable gun.
It's a hammer fire, double single action pistol.
Yeah.
So it fulfills the criteria of most of Bond's preferred pistols.
Yeah, it has military
heritage.
service and things like that. It is a pretty cool gun. And I'll let you tell the story, but it also kind of interesting, No Time to Die with the poster sort of fiasco.
Yeah. So that was really funny. So there was a lot of posters put out for No Time to Die with all the delays and stuff. But the first change that had to be made was one of the posters that released. They do character posters now for movies where it's really simple backdrop and everyone's being announced for the film in costume. And noticeably, one of the first posters of James Bond has him in his commando sweater with a drop leg holster that's empty. And in his hand is a Walther PPK. And everyone flamed the crap out of that poster because they're like, is James Bond really carrying a Walther PPK in a full-size nylon snap cover
duty rig?
Like looks like something out of a Black Hawk catalog from 2004.
Yeah.
So, well, as you watch the movie, you realize that's what the P99 or the 226 went.
Yeah.
So what they did was when they re-released the poster, they actually airbrushed a 226 into his hand and deleted the PPK. They memory hold the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the internet never forgets.
Yeah. I'd be curious it'd be funny if you could actually find like a poster, like if those exist.
Yeah. If they actually
PPK
did enough printing, you can find a few of those. I think it'd be fun to do like a. The dates change so often too because they kept pushing the movie.
Yeah.
You just do a whole series of all that and all the little nuance changes.
So to wrap it up, I'm going to hit you with something you didn't know was coming.
Oh, good.
That would be called the lightning round, my friend.
Lightning round, let's do it.
So you don't have much time to think about the answers.
Okay.
Best Bond movie.
I'm going to say best, not favorite, is From Russia with Love.
Okay. Worst Bond movie.
Die Another Day.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Which Bond era was best? Cinema. Basically like a more Connery, which
Sean
era? Connery.
Connery.
Okay.
Dr. No to Thunderball, flawless. He only has 2 strikes on his record.
Okay, okay, fantastic. Why does James Bond choose to drink a lady's drink?
Oh, the martini?
Yes.
Oh, well, his martini, I'll have you know, would make even the most ardent alcoholic balk because the Vespers, 3 measures of gin, 1 of vodka, and half a measure of a hardened wine.
Okay, well, that's pretty stiff.
So it's 4.5 shots of liquor. And the only thing cutting that is a long, thin slice of lemon peel. So while it is shaken well over
stiff
ice,
drink.
you're bruising the alcohol, but like it's still, if it's mixed poorly, it still tastes like Lysol.
Yeah, that one.
I enjoy it, but
it'll get the job done. That'll get the job done.
Yeah.
I'll give him a pass on that. And then final one, without picking a PPK or a P99, what should the next James Bond gun be?
For the carry gun, I would love to go back to one of our dark horses. I'd love to see the P7. For a full size, I want a steel frame Walther, I want a Q4 SF, or I want the PDP SF. I think that fits the vibe of a steel frame full size pistol, and then paired with a gun that's part of the Bond legacy that we just haven't seen before.
Okay. Okay, man, hey, sharp. Most people get flustered on the lightning round. Most people are like, "Oh my god, I know," so kind of they cry, and next
We'll
thing
do what we can here.
Very dramatic. So again, book pre-sale starts about now.
Yep, pre-sale. I'm sure we can link it in the bio or whatever you
Yeah.
guys are willing to do. Licensed troubleshooter, the guns of James Bond through Headstamp Publishing. Kickstarter will be our pre-sale.
Yeah, super cool. I mean, this has been a lot of fun.
It's been so much fun, man.
You flew in. We got in last night, hung out in the desert here. I mean, it's currently what are we at? Coming up on 10 p.m. right now.
We're shooting in and out for a full day.
Wrapping this thing up. So it's cool. Hope you guys like this. If you did, throw a comment below. If you want to see more editions, we do have a couple more fun spins.
There's a lot of Bond guns out there.
A lot of stuff we did not talk about in this, not just pistols. So comment below. Appreciate you coming.
Hey, it's been a lot, man.
Oh yeah. Good luck with the book. All right,
Cheers.
guys. We'll see you next time.